to another episode of Inside the Recording Studio. I am Jody Whitesides, and with me, as always, is Mr. Chris Hellstrom. How are you today, Chris?
I'm very excited today because we have a guest on today that I've been excited to talk to and about for a long time. So without further ado, thank you, Adam Moseley, for being with us here today.
I'm clapping myself. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for doing this. We appreciate it.
Yes, right, absolutely. We were just talking here before we started recording, but the last time you and I saw each other, it was at least a decade ago. So we have a fair bit of stuff to kind of catch up on here, I think.
It'll only take a minute.
All right, well, that's that. So thank you for being here, Adam. We're good. Yeah.
Pleasure.
But like we used to do, or like we like to do, or a phrase like that when we have a guest on, is for those who are not aware of you and your history, can you give us a little bit of a background of who you are and what you have been doing?
Yeah, I'll try and do the shorter version.
Let's do the short version, yes.
Yeah, because it's 45 years. So on day one, this is what, no. So I come from Brighton on the south coast of England. I'm now an American Brit, and I've been living in LA permanently for 25 years, I believe. I first came to LA in 1986. I grew up in a musical family. I think I've tried to work out, how is it that I've come to do what I do? And I've been making music, as I said, for 45 years.
Whew, that's a long time.
It is, yeah. I think one of the most important things was that I was born into a musical family. My dad was a jazz musician, played jazz guitar, upright bass, and electric bass. My mum was at home looking after the three of us, my twin brother and my sister. And all day she'd be singing along with the radio. My dad, during the Second World War, had been in the Air Force, and he'd been a radio mechanic in the RAF. So the whole house was wired with speakers. We had speakers everywhere, stereo speakers from the hi-fi in the lounge into the kitchen. So if we were eating at the kitchen table, or my mum was at the sink cooking, or watching my brother and I playing in the backyard, music was always in stereo. And I think it was one of my first recollections, is always hearing music in glorious stereo.
Wow.
And hearing it through hi-fi, and just being aware of the sound and the depth of the sound, and just how sound felt. But I was too young to know that. My mum would be singing along with Ella and her favorite Sarah Vaughan or Sinatra or Perry Como, whatever. My parents loved big band jazz, Benny Goodman, Dizzy Gillespie, Count Basie. My dad also obviously loved the whole bebop period and loved Latin American music. So
that's quite the cross-section you got going there.
It really was. Whether it was like more pop Sergio Mendes or Herb Alpert, which is an amazing name in my story now, or Gilberto Gil, the great Latin albums, the great Brazilian writers. So I just always grew up with music. I never used the term lucky except in one example, because I believe that luck may be a factor, but anything that happens in your life basically is because you created it, without getting too hippy-dippy. But I mean, we are in LA. But I think the one thing that's lucky is that I was born into a musical family, and I have a sister who's 5 years older. I was born in 1957. There, I've given it away. But so when the Beatles broke, I was like 5-6 years old, and my sister was 10, and that was just perfect, because it just seemed like every day my sister was borrowing an album or coming home with another vinyl, and it was the Beatles or the Stones or the Who or the Kinks, or then it was Zeppelin or Hendrix or Carole King or Joni Mitchell or James Taylor or Crosby Stills or Pink Floyd, etc., etc.
So was the movie that Cameron Crowe did, what was the music movie that he did about the band Stillwater?
You Are Home. That's the best line.
Yes, You Are Home. But it sounds like he wrote it about you.
It's wow, court case coming on. Very similar experience. Very similar. So I had bands at school. We were crap. I was banned from learning music.
Oh, no.
How do you get banned from learning music?
Well, I went to a very good English grammar school, all boys school, 650 boys, a very good Protestant British school. And as a East European, 100% Jewish immigrant, and being one of 7 other Jewish kids there, we weren't very popular except for being chased and caught.
Oh, dear.
And my music teacher didn't allow me to study music. It was that simple. So
that's crazy.
Yeah. So I would just jam along with records. Around the age of 13, what flipped it for me, 2 things. One, obviously, the third factor, obviously, my dad and his influence as a musician and instruments being around and the instruments being available. They weren't locked away. So I could pick up my dad's electric bass, or I wasn't tall enough for his upright. But there were just instruments around and always music. But then 2 things happened around 1970, 69, 70, was I heard Chicago with Terry Kath, the guitarist, who some people know as Jimi Hendrix's favorite guitarist, similar wah-wah style. I heard Terry Kath, which made me want to be a rock star in a band. and I heard Michael Brecker play tenor saxophone, and that made me want to play an instrument. So
wow. That's 2 very different instruments. Which one did you go with?
I went for saxophone. I never thought I would get my head around guitar.
Why is that?
Just the configurations and the hand shapes. I never thought I'd be able to do it. From my dad's bass, I was like, my brain had gone into kind of like linear kind of playing, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I never thought I'd get my head around piano or get my head around guitar, which was like the shapes and things. And saxophone, again, was more of a linear instrument. And also there was an explosion of horn sections on records. You know, there was
Tower of Power.
Tower of Power, Blood, Sweat and Tears, a band called Ides of March, which had a huge hit called Vehicle around that time. Chicago, obviously, with this this band of biker dudes, you know, with cut-off denim tops and big biceps and full of tats and everything. Suddenly, horns were on every record, but on rock records and rock jazz records. And this was the convergence of the world that I'd kind of known. Yeah, that's what led to that. So it was an amazing time for like horn sections with rock music and this convergence of all these things that I was hearing and being influenced by. Put a band together at school. We were terrible. We were really crap. And I thought, well, look.
Most school bands are.
Yeah.
You know, to be fair.
And as my cousin still really enjoys telling me how bad my band was. Obviously, I decided that it couldn't be me. It must be because in Brighton at the time, there weren't lots of good musicians around. So obviously, I needed to move to London. To do that, I took a gap year, a year off of school before initially planning to go to university. And I worked on construction sites and saved up enough money. And for most of the year, Chris, you may recall that I went to live in Sweden. I mean, you wouldn't know from then, but from later stories. Yeah.
You were telling me, yeah. So how old are you at this point when you decide to move to London?
17, 18.
Okay.
I'd already worked my holidays. I was working for the language exchange school called EF, which is actually a Swedish company, Europeiska Familjeskolan. So I'll write that out if I didn't pronounce it properly.
Chris will slap you if you know.
Europeiska, I think. Anyway, went to live in Sweden for a year. I'd traveled before. I'd been broke when I was traveling. I was eating out of trash bins and stuff. So this time I knew get jobs with food. So I got 3 jobs working every day with food. One of the jobs was working in a restaurant. I walked in to get the job as washer-up as the assistant chef was storming out, and I became the assistant chef.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. The main chef said, do you have experience? And I said, yeah, that's amazing. All my papers, with immigration at the moment in Stockholm, but as soon as I get my certificates back, I'll show you. And I got hired instead of washer-up. I was the sous chef and started that day. The relevance of that was after my kind of like 8-9 months in Stockholm, came back to London, went to university for a year and studied law. Put a band together and we were still crap. So I thought, oh no, maybe it's not the town I'm in. Maybe it's more to do with me. So I thought, I've just got to know how to do this. I did the year of law school, hated it, failed everything except contract law. I came third in contract, which was one of the best things I ever could have done for stepping into the music business.
Sure.
Quit law school, became a driver in the clothes business, delivering dresses for 6 months while I wrote 100 letters to studios. I got one reply.
But the 100 is the perseverance of getting to that one.
Yeah. And the one reply, I knew nothing about the studio except that they offered me an interview. I went to the studio and the studio manager said, why did you write to us? And I said, well, I'd like to be a record producer, please. Do you have any jobs going? And he kind of laughed. And he said, well, do you know anything about the studio? And I said, not really. And he said, well, a few people have come from here and they've done okay. But I see from your letter that you've been a chef and also done construction. And I said, yeah. He said, great. We're enlarging the control room. We're putting in a new console, which turned out to be a Trident A range.
Ooh.
So we're putting in a new console. The window of the control room is too small and the control room is too small. So we're expanding it into like open space because it was a control room that was upstairs looking down, a bit like Abbey Road 2, the Beatles room.
Nice.
So I got high, and he said, and I'm effed off buying takeout food I got 15 people working. It's too expensive, so I want you to cook for everyone at night.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He said, on the top floor, on the 5th floor, you'll find that there's a 4-ring stove with an oven. I want you to cook 3-course meals for 15 people every night. Do construction during the day. Start at 9 a.m. At 4 in the afternoon, come to me. Tell me how much money you need to go down the markets in Soho, buy food. I want you to cook, serve, clean up, put everything away, then go back to construction.
This is beyond being a glorified gopher.
It was below. Even I found an entry level in life, basically, but an entry level into a studio where even the T-boys gave me shit.
Wow. That's funny.
My position wasn't officially recognized as a human life form.
Oh,
I had to grow into that, but that's what I did. 6 days a week, 9 a.m. to 3 a.m.
How long did it take to build that room?
They'd started building the room and enlarging it, but I remember being one of the 12 people carrying the frame of that Trident A range into the room. And the big reveal, the studio was Trident Studios in Soho, London. I knew nothing about it. I sat down at the piano. I thought no one was around, and someone came screaming down the stairs going, "Who the F do you think you are?" Touching that piano. And I thought, oh my God, that's it. I'm done. Game over. And I was like almost in tears, and then like liquids coming out of any part of the body where they could come out in any form. I thought, this is it, game over. And he said, "Do you have any idea who's played on that piano? What gives you the right to touch it?" But by which time I was whimpering,
Yeah.
And he reeled off the songs that had been recorded on that piano, which included "Hey Jude," the Beatles' White Album, Louis Transformer, David Bowie's first 3 albums, Ziggy Stardust.
Wow.
Hunky Dory.
Serious history going on that piano.
Yeah. Also, Elton John's first 3 albums, the first 2 Peter Gabriel's, the first 3 Genesis.
No wonder they were freaking out.
Yeah, T-Rex, Supertramp, later Carly Simon, You're So Vain, Harry Nilsson Schmilson, and it went on and on. This was like the legendary Trident 70s era. This was January 1978. I got hired. And after 3 months, I didn't know what was going to happen. The construction was finished. The room was ready. And I got promoted to T-Boy. And it was like, yes.
And then you touched the piano.
Yeah. I nearly got fired. But that was it. My first 4 years, from January 12, 1978, until Trident closed at the very end of 1981. So those were my 4 formative years.
Wow.
At the latter stage of the original Trident era. So the guys that I was learning under, first of all, cooking for, then bringing cups of tea or coffee for, And then I became a tape op, then senior tape op assistant engineer, then like co-engineering, then starting to mix and co-produce and then produce. And that was the typical journey.
How many years did that take overall? That sounds like a long journey there.
I was actually the fastest person at Trident to progress through that stage. I went from walking in the door to tape op within 9 months, which...
Wow.
When you say walking in the door, when you were walking in to construct
literally,
the new studio and cook.
Yeah, to get hired. Yeah. And normally that was going to be at least an 18-month journey at Trident. Trident was much more experimental, and everyone flew by the seat of their pants, basically. Everyone made it up as they went along. Abbey Road, that would take you maybe 3 years to actually, before you possibly got to be a tape operator and run the tape machine. But at Trident, I managed to do that. One, the competition was so fierce that you couldn't afford one mistake. I had a little bit of resistance like I'd had at school. So I knew that I wasn't popular with some people, including the manager, who after 6 months told me that if he had known that I was Jewish, he'd never have hired me.
Really?
Yeah. So he
at this point, that's
he didn't say it quite as politely as that.
Oh Jesus!
Yeah, and it was like, fine,
right. I'll show you the type of
thing. And
I
did. The day he got fired, I stood at the front door of the studio, which led onto the little alleyway that Trident was in. I stood there all day waiting for him to come downstairs.
So that you could hit the door with his ass on the way out?
Yeah. And no,
wow.
Exactly. He came down with his sad cardboard box and a few drinks in, you know, with all the different people in the building. And he walked down the stairs, walked towards the door. I put my hand out. He put his hand out to shake it. I swung it around and grabbed the door handle. Just opened the door handle and gave him a thumb and said, "Be seeing you then."
Oh, nice.
Man.
Yeah.
That had to feel pretty good, yeah?
It did. And by not doing that earlier, I'd kept my job. I'd started to build my career and kept my eye on the prize.
There you go.
Which is the most important thing is, you know, setting your goals and dealing with whatever shit comes up, because shit's going to come up.
Sure.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. That's quite a journey there, Adam. I mean, just a couple of things that just strike me there, obviously, that perseverance being the first one of them, right? And not, you know, going into a situation where they say, well, we got construction and you got to cook. And sort of the mindset there again, like, yeah, I'm fine, I'll do that as long as I get it shot type of thing, right?
Yeah. My German immigrant grandmother, me being the first grandson to go to university and law school, I went with my twin brother, but I'm 5 minutes older, so technically I was the first one.
Right.
She never got over the fact that I quit law school. Even later, I was involved in Roxette's first album, Look Sharp.
Yeah.
20 million sales. That still wasn't
good
recognition.
Enough, huh?
No.
Yeah, but you could have done something with your life, right?
Yeah, I could have had a real job.
Right.
Oh, boy.
Wow.
But I tried, and one says that the people that I learnt from and assisted, and it really was sit at the back of the room, run the tape machine, shut the fuck up, watch, listen, and try and figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, but the people I was doing that with were the guys that had been on those Bowie albums. And especially in an on-off period over 3 years, I was working so many albums with Mike Stone, who had, again, quit his public school. That he went to public school with Prince Charles, I think, got into Trident as a T-boy, worked his way up. Trident signed Queen to a five-album deal because no one wanted Queen. The Beatles were still at Trident with the White Album, and the studio wanted to keep the Beatles. They'd moved from Abbey Road, and Trident had got them. So Trident didn't want to keep the Beatles sweet. And I believe the story is that Brian May had become friends with McCartney, and McCartney was liked him and thought his band was kind of cool and interesting. So McCartney had asked the studio, as I believe it, if they could give this band some downtime, you know. So in typical music business fashion, they gave Queen downtime at like 2 a.m. in the morning to come in and do their demos. And
much like the Beatles when they got started.
Yeah, but charged them full weight and signed them to a 5-album deal. And Mike Stone, as the junior, new upcoming engineer, would just put on the sessions to do the demos because no one else, wanted to come in at 2 a.m. or stay after their day session and do the second one. So Mike was one of my main mentors. Peter Kelsey, who lives here in LA, Steve W. Taylor, who is still doing phenomenal work. He lives near Bath in the west of England and has his own studio at Peter Gabriel's studio there, Real World.
Right.
But those guys, and Mike Stone, I started off with him on 4 Kiss albums. That was kind of like my baptism.
Right. So I know that you've worked with Kiss, but now I'm as an avid Kiss fan, I might have to ask you to expand on that a little bit. What time period are we talking right now?
Let's go with that right after a word from our sponsors. And we're back, and we're going to shuffle on into some Kiss questions, apparently, from Chris.
Well, yeah, the first thing, what time period are we're talking about right now?
So this is probably 78 or 79. Probably 79.
Okay, so things are starting to go downhill now if you're Kiss.
I think that's what I brought to it.
Oh, no.
No.
Way to down it there.
No. I think the peak had already been had, sort of thing,
right.
And it was probably starting to. So, what material were you working on there?
I think first of all, it was double platinum. I think that's the sequence.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Mike was doing some work on that. Generally, he'd record most of the bands he was working with. He'd record, especially like the Kiss stuff, he'd record in the States.
Well, that was done in New York, I would assume.
Yeah. And then he'd come to London and we would do like all the overdubs. Later on with Terry Brown, it would be the same with Rush, where often they'd record in Quebec or in Wales at Rockfield and then come to Trident and do all the overdubs, all the additional stuff, all the solos, vocals and mix. But with Kiss, I think the first thing was assisting Mike on double platinum. And Chris, you'll tell me. And then they did the 4 solo albums. I think that's correct.
Right.
So Mike did Gene's solo album, Paul's solo album, and Peter's.
I feel like he had to have done that before double platinum.
Okay, possible.
And here's the reason why I would say this. Here's the reason why I would say this. My father was hired by Kiss's manager to do artwork for each one of them of their face without makeup before they ever went without makeup, and then a miniature of their actual character in front of their face. I went to go meet them in 1977 as a tiny little kid at their rehearsal spot. And they gave me, at that time, all of the records that they have, plus they gave me 4 solo records that were marked NFR because they hadn't been released. And that was before
Amazing.
double platinum. So I have to feel like that those were done before double platinum, but they were not released until after.
Oh, okay. That's possible. Yeah, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah,
but
the release of the solo album was definitely after.
Oh, yeah. But I do believe that they were actually recorded before because I had NFRs of all 4 of them before that.
Amazing.
Yeah. All right. Well, so sorry. Keep going here, Adam. Because the Kiss lineage here is obviously really, really important.
and my effect on their career as the tape officers.
Oh no.
Yeah.
But so Gene's album. I mean, they were 26. They were 26 years old. Yeah, Gene's was tough. I think I can say that.
Yeah.
Not the easiest of things. Thankfully, he was dating Cher at the time, so they were quite busy with each other, which let us get on with the music. And then when we did Paul Stanley's album, I got to say that Paul's was probably one of the most fun records I ever worked on.
Is that right?
And Gene's wasn't.
Okay.
But Paul was just fantastic. We also did that record on Graveyard Shift. We started at midnight.
Oof.
Every night for about 3 months.
For how many hours? Full 8-hour shift?
We 12. We'd go to midday. Yeah.
Wow.
Your sessions were always at least 12 hours if the room was being split. Sure. Otherwise, your normal working day was like 15, 16 or so, because people were paying a day rate.
Sure.
So they
Get the full
as much
day.
as they could. Yeah, literally. So yeah, those were some of the first records, and Paul was always he just knew he was like one of the luckiest guys, in music, and was a lot of fun, and yeah, really good memories. Also within that crowd, we were doing Paul's and Gene's obviously separately, but I think Mike hadn't finished Peter's album and was slipping the tracks he had to still finish. Sometimes we would jump in when no one was going to know, and we'd quickly finish something up on Peter's album, although I think it was meant to be Paul's session, or I won't say Gene's. It was great. And at the time, their manager, I don't know if it was the same manager you mentioned, but it was Bill O'Coin.
I was going to say, it was
Yeah.
probably him.
I wouldn't know.
still
I
at
was
this
too
point,
young
right?
to know.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
all I
But,
know is that I got to meet them without their makeup on before they unmasked themselves, and I thought
Yeah.
I was the coolest thing since sliced bread.
Yeah. The first time I arrived at the studio, Gene had actually got to the studio early and was sitting in the room. And of course, no one had seen them without makeup. And he was sitting in the room in an armchair in a 3-piece pinstripe suit with his hair all perfectly groomed and snakeskin cowboy boots with his 3-piece suit, which was quite a striking. And then he stood up, and of course he was tall, and his hair was even taller, and kind of for a 20-year-old who knew nothing, it was quite
It's
a
imposing character.
yeah, exactly. I remember much later on, I did in 1984, I was doing a live mix of Heaven's on Fire, and they needed to redo it, and I needed to re-trigger the kick drum because the kick drum mic had cut out, so there was just a pop sound happening from the kick drum, and I had to sample a kick drum from elsewhere in the show and put it into the AMS delay, which had a 17-second delay before it triggered the sound. So with the tape machine, you had to come off the sync head into the trigger, then delay the trigger, because coming off the sync head was 75 milliseconds ahead of the replay
Oh wow.
head on the tape machine, and then work out the difference, delay the signal back, but bearing in mind that the AMS would take 17 seconds to spit out the trigger and replace the drum. And I remember doing all of that and working on it and struggling, and it was the first time I was like completely on my own on a Kiss record, and I was only working with Gene. And I remember like I've been working on the drums for like 4 or 6 hours, and he suddenly he didn't say a word to me for 6 hours. Then he just stood up from the back of the room, walked forward and stood over me and said, "Is that your kick drum sound?"
Oh,
like,
man.
And it was another whoosh moment,
Blood drains out.
Yeah, fluids. Yeah, all fluids.
Right. Stories like that, though, makes it, here's a pet peeve of mine. In today's, with all the beautiful gear that we have available to us in doing any task, where people complain about that something is hard to do. Shouldn't there be a plug-in for that? And then you get cases like that. It's like,
where your math skills have to be ridiculous because you have to figure out the timing of the tape, the timing of the gear that's triggering, and figure out the delay that's going on. 17 seconds is a hefty delay.
So 17 milliseconds. 17 milliseconds.
Oh, 17 milliseconds. Okay.
Yeah, to trigger the AMS drum sample, and you could sample 1.2 seconds of audio, so you could just get a kick drum in there, basically with a bit of tail, but you couldn't like truncate it properly to the front, so you also had to figure that out. And again, you were coming off the 75 millisecond difference between the head gaps on the sync and playback heads. So, but I mean, it was amazing. It was phenomenal, mind-blowing that you could now replace a kick drum.
Sure.
And all you had to do was like
figure out the
switch
time.
That's all you had to do. And you could like this delay, you could actually sample 1.2 seconds in. It was a game changer.
Out of curiosity, where did you get that kick sample from? Or
it was from somewhere else in the show.
There was an isolated thing that you could kind of...
Yeah. And I remember that Gene wasn't very happy with the audience reaction on that part of the show of Heaven's on Fire. So I also had to go to a different song. I can't remember what it was in the show. Play the audience tracks onto a 2-track machine, record the audience on a 2-track, and then play it back in to the version of Heaven's on Fire to beef up the audience reaction.
Sure.
Sounds like every Japanese live record they've ever done.
Well, it sounds like every live album they've ever done, really.
That's funny.
What I've heard, and I think it's true, is like Live 2 was recorded at the soundstage at A&M, right?
Oh.
I think, yeah. Whereas,
And
like,
then they
the
just
audio
dubbed
was
in
just
all
not
the
good.
audience.
Yep.
Makes sense.
The beauty of recording in hindsight, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But it's something I think will come up in our chat a lot, but we'll talk about this later. But you guys know that I teach at Her Powerput School of Music at UCLA, and I did a music production masterclass at Berkeley in Valencia, Spain. And so many music makers want to know, why did those records sound so good? You know, what was so special about them? One of the biggest things is that it was all about vibe. No one had a clue what they were doing. No one was technically trained in anything, especially at Trident. It was all that you made it up as you went along. And everyone was discovering new ways to do things. The engineers back then, and huge respect to Jeff Emmerich at Abbey Road, just for what he was inventing. And I think the important thing is, I love plugins. I work with technology all the time. I was quite early on, I was involved with Plugin Alliance, Brainworks, in some of their early plugins. I love their plugins. They're so human and musical.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Plugin Alliance stuff.
And Sound Toys. One of the most amazing things with Sound Toys is in Echo Boy, you can set your delay. You can set it to be in time with your track. MIDI sync it, whatever the button's going to be called that syncs it to the BPM of your session. But then, just even one example with Echo Boy, there's a dial which is either rushing or dragging. So they understand that it's all about feel with your delay. Now, as we're talking about
That's a tie back to last week's episode right there.
Yeah, we actually talked about delay times and vocals and things, but yeah. So go ahead, please. Yeah.
We'd have like the 24-track machine in the room. Trident was the first studio to go 8-track, which is why the Beatles went there. It was the first studio to be 16, the first to be 24. And then the enlargement of the room when I got hired was because they were going to go 48.
Mm-hmm.
So the second machine would be in an outside room. But then we would have 4 stereo machines. 4 stereo 2-track machines, which were being used as delays. So each button on the desk that was a send, you'd have like 6 buttons, 6 little white buttons to push in to send 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, but only one gain control on it. But maybe button 1 would send the signal from your lead guitar or the vocal or whatever you wanted to tape machine 2-track 1, which was maybe running at 15 IPS, and you wanted it on a slow delay, on like an 1/8 kind of delay thing. So what we would do, the signal would be sent from the board from button 1. You'd have the one gain knob to send it there. It would send to the tape machine. It would hit the record head. And then before the tape hit the playback head, we'd pull the tape off the tape machine, put it around a mic stand, and then feed the tape back to the playback head. And however much you pulled that mic stand out was the length of the delay.
Right.
So
how's that for mathematical? We're out 5 feet.
And I'd have Mike Stone going, no, it's on the vocal. Just take it a bit closer to the machine. And what I'd listen, I'd hear, wow, this is kind of like an edgy song. And here's the delay is actually coming back a little bit early, which is giving a bit more of a punch. But if it was a dreamy vocal and a dreamy guitar solo or something, he might want me to pull the mic stand out on machine number 2, which might be on a quarter beat delay, but pull that out more so it was kind of lazy the way the delay was happening. It was like slightly after the beat. Also, the important thing, it was always done by feel, not by a math chart or an algorithm. And also, so feel was done by listening. But also, these variables is what made everything so musical and feel so great. So I love plugins. Believe me, I don't want... It was like spinning plates. It was like having 4 plates spinning on sticks, and they were all spinning at different times and starting to wobble at different times. And you had to keep all 4 machines going. You also had to decide, when am I going to change the tape? because as you spent all day or 2 days running the delays while the mix was happening, suddenly the sound would deteriorate because you were losing oxide off the tape, and it would start to sound a lot warmer. So at some stage you had to change the reel of tape on maybe machine 3, which meant anyone using button 3 on the mix, now the delay was going to sound a lot brighter because all the top end was back, which meant that the delay was now going to appear louder than it had and be more prominent. So now they had to relearn their moves because you had 6 buttons for sends, but only 1 gain for all 6 of them. So my first experience in mixing, where I was allowed to sit in the mix room, we had a Trident B range, which was the same as the A range, all the same mechanics basically, except it was more set out for mixing. And my first experience of being invited to sit up with the grown-ups at the mix was Rush, Permanent Waves.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
What an album.
I know. I'd assisted on Hemispheres. They'd done that at Trident. And then even when Neil Kernan did Moving Pictures, who was Trident guy as well, he brought it back just to verify all the mixes and just listen to everything. On the early Elton John albums, when Elton John had done his first 3 albums at Trident and then went to Le Chateau in France, every night they'd fly the tapes back in a private little plane from France to the Trident mix room, and someone was on night shift and would put the tapes up and listen to them to make sure that what they were recording sounded okay, because it was the first record they'd done.
That's taking the idea of checking your mixes to the extreme right there.
Yeah, and like going out to the car to have a listen.
Sure.
That takes it a...
Yeah. We need to go all the way back to this particular studio.
Yeah.
Something also tells me that budgets might have been a little bit different.
They were.
Yes.
A lot of factors were very different back in the day.
Yeah.
But Permanent Waves was the first album where I got to sit at the console, 4 people shoulder to shoulder, squashed up, 10 faders each. I was sitting on the end. I had channels like 1 through 10. The B range was a 40 channel, I believe. Then it was Terry Brown, and then Geddy, and then Alex. Neil never came to the overdubbing or the recording things. Often he'd be tucked away back in Canada somewhere working on the lyrics or something like that. And he found the process, apparently he just found it a bit boring, just like, all the overdub stuff. But so they do the basic tracks either at Le Studio in Quebec, which had an A range, or they'd go to Rockfield in Wales, which had an A range because it was owned by a former Trident, an early 70s Trident guy, Ted Sharp. And then they'd bring it to Trident in Soho, and we would do all the overdubs, all the vocals, all the solos, Geddy doing his Taurus pedals,
Right.
And then we would mix. So one of the first mixes that I ever had my fingers on was Spirit Radio.
Wow.
And nobody
really?
knows that song.
Yeah. Whatever happened to that band?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing, Adam.
Fortunately, my fingers on 10 faders didn't have the same influence as they did on Kiss's career.
Well, you were a little bit further in your career at that point, right? So it was already heading in the right direction.
Exactly.
Right?
I'd learned some of that magic touch a little bit more. But like mixing the tracks on Permanent Waves, we would mix the songs in sections, and maybe there'd be 4 of us shoulder to shoulder, squashed up, 10 faders each, playing the faders. And I'd never really understood what is mixing about. My experience of recording, and I understood it, and everyone's adding all the parts and adding the ideas and making the arrangement work and getting the dynamics going and adding the stuff. And so I'd never really appreciated the creative aspect, the performance aspect of mixing. Sure. And again, this is something I bring in to, working in Pro Tools. You can still perform your mixes even if it's 1 fader at a time.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's what we did. Shoulder to shoulder, 4 of us, 10 faders each, Spirit of Radio. We'd spend hours just on the intro section before it drops into, with all the fancy guitar stuff, and then it drops into the rhythm part, which is the second part of the intro before verse 1. But we would spend hours, just 4 of us, vibing the faders, trying different effects, different sends, learning how much gain to give on button 3, but then get button 3 up and quickly get it to 2 on the same track. But your gain had to be number 2 there, but you were going to max it up to maybe 3.7. And nothing could ever be written down because that meant that you weren't really good at what you were doing.
Right.
Yeah. So all of this had to be learned. and also in conjunction with what the other three were doing, and the other three only happened to be Terry, Brown, Geddy, and Alex. So there was, nothing serious about that situation either.
Right.
Although the most lovely blokes ever, and every night Alex and I would jump up to the kitchen and we'd cook a meal because on the sessions we'd got fed up with takeout foods. So Alex and I would run up to the kitchen and we'd trade recipes and make food together for everyone.
Nice.
Which was always fun.
So what was the favorite dish that you got to cook?
Oh man, the best thing I learned from Alex was to make shepherd's pie, and to have whatever your.
Wait, are you having a Canadian man teaching you how to make shepherd's pie?
That kind of state. What?
I know, but we all had that Eastern European immigrant background anyway, so it was all new territory. Shepherd's pie at that time we were using meat. I don't eat meat now, but whatever your meat sauce is, and then there'd be a layer of cheese completely.
Okay.
Then there would be eggs, and then the mashed potato.
Wow.
And
I don't think I've ever had it with eggs.
Nor had I. Boom. Amazing. Anyway, that's apart from learning how to mix on permanent waves, I also learned how to do shepherd's pie with eggs from Alex.
It's the gift that keeps on giving.
I know.
Yeah.
And at the end of the album, they bought me a Swedish chef little doll.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, from the Muppets.
Nice.
Right.
That was it. And Mike Stone, his second wife, was Norwegian, a Norwegian model, and because I'd lived in Sweden and I'd learnt Swedish before coming back, Mike, whenever his wife called, he would just ask me to talk to her, and he would want me to speak in Swedish, because he just thought it was such a funny language. He didn't actually care too much to talk to his wife. He just wanted to laugh at how funny Swedish sounded in a very loving way. He was a beautiful person, really lovely person.
Wow.
But yeah, that was part of my very early beginnings. Trident was very much, the bastion of rock. It really was for English rock, and it had been Thin Lizzy and T-Rex and so many other bands. The Stones had been there as well, and then Trident went into the disco period after that, after all the big. So I got the musicianship then was just phenomenal. Every week we were recording at least 2 string sections a week, which is why I really learned to understand about arrangements. And they were flying in horn players from New York and flew in the Brecker brothers, Michael Brecker.
Oh wow! So you get to work with them now.
Yeah. On a Tina Turner album. And of course, Tina Turner would walk in the room and everyone would be gobsmacked. She was like royalty, one of the most gracious people ever. And just she hadn't even blown up yet in her solo career. This was an interim disco record she made, not necessarily the high point of her. She hadn't done the Private Dancer album and What's Love Got to Do with It yet.
Right.
But still, she just had such a aura about her. Just phenomenal. But they flew the Brecker brothers in, and now I was putting a microphone up for Michael Brecker, who had inspired me to want to be in a band. And as time went on, I ended up working with him 4 times and got to know him, and that was just such a major point for me.
I bet that's fantastic.
Like
to
a full
get to
circle
work
moment.
To get to work with one of your heroes that sort of kicked it off, that had to be an amazing experience. Yeah. So I have a question that I like to, just as a sidestep here, because you keep mentioning Trident, obviously Trident Studio, and as we tend to do today, I think we sometimes conflate the gear and the software and all this kind of stuff with good products, like you keep hinting at. There's a certain reason why it was air quote better in those days, right? Have you tried or are you using the Trident channel strip plugin?
Absolutely, the soft tube one,
right?
Swedish company from Linköping, I think. It's stunning.
Yeah,
it is stunning. I do some kind of like feedback with the Trident guys who own Trident now, and they make the 80. Yeah, they do a 60, 70, and 80. I've got some Trident 80B EQs right behind me in my room, but the soft tube plugin is just phenomenal. It really is. And when Plugin Alliance were doing the SSL channel, Dirk, who is Brainworks,
Right.
Plugin Alliance, Dirk Ulrich, I remember he was doing a demonstration, and I sat down with him at an SSL 4000 console because, jumping ahead, in 1983, Trident had closed, they reopened, they bought a second studio, which had been 10cc's mastering room, and put an SSL in. And I was one of the first SSL guys in the UK, and we were working on, it was actually a 6000 series, but it was exactly the same as the 4000E. It just had a different 3-bus button on it, basically. When Dirk was modeling the SSL 4000E, I sat down with him for a little bit at a 4000E, and he had the plug-in going direct to the monitors, and we had the same signal. It was a guitar going through the console, through the real SSL analog, and going through the plug-in. And we weren't doing any Spectrum Analyzer stuff. They'd already done that.
Right.
We were just listening to how it sounded when you actually increased like 3K, and any harmonic kind of stuff that was happening. And that's what I love about the artistry of Plugin Alliance. It's also musical. I've got all of their channel strips, the Neve 88R, the vintage Neve 80, the Focusrite.
I like the Focusrite, by the way.
It's amazing. And I've got some of the blue ISAs in my room at Mic Pre's, which I love the Focusrite ISA Mic Pre's. But, when I'm tracking drums, one of the first things I'm going to decide, or tracking any record, is what is the sound that I want for the drums, as well as the sound of the room. So I'm either going to go for a vintage 70s sounding room, like Studio 2 or 3 at East West. And Studio 3 at East West in the Beach Boys room has part of the original Trident from Soho, London, in that room now. So that's always kind of pretty wild.
So it's like coming home.
It's wild. Yeah, I always get a bit misty-eyed there. So much a part of capturing the sound of any record and getting the feel and the character that you want comes down to, well, which studio, what's the room sound like, which console am I going to use, which microphones I'm going to use, which kit will I use, who's the drum, all these different factors. But the console is, sometimes I'll go to a room just because they've got a vintage API, and I really want to track my drums on an API.
Sure.
But if I'm doing strings, I might want to track the strings on a Neve 88R, which is always perfect for an orchestra. So working in the box, if I'm working on a session that was either handed to me or I didn't get to record it where I would have wanted to, I can put the channel strips for the API console on my drums. On my strings, I can put the Neve 88R. On anything else, I can put my Trident A range or my ADB, or I can do whatever. And the most important thing is that all these things, especially from these good companies, they have so crafted the sound, and they're musical people who are doing it in the first place and really care about what they're doing. And the most important thing is to educate your ears so that you actually know which colors to choose.
Right.
And that's where I think the vintage stuff, it's so important for music makers to educate themselves, watch videos, watch YouTube clips, read articles, read Jeff Emerick's book or Ken Scott's book, or there's another book. I did a panel with Jeff Emerick a few years back, I think it was at AES, and there's a great book called The Great British Recording Studios, and it actually goes through all the equipment that each one had. There's all the information is out there, for any music maker today. All they have to do is have the will to actually want to learn.
Right.
Key phrase there, the will.
Yeah.
As your career is already proving, is like you had the will. I mean, you started out
always,
constructing and making food and working your way up. Real quick, before we jump to whatever is next in your head, you mentioned something about getting a side-by-side with the SSL, but you didn't actually say whether there was a big difference or not in the plug-in to the console.
No, I mean, Dirk's just phenomenal, really. I mean, he's a mad heavy metal guitarist anyway. So he was really like wanting to dial into those overtones that happen when you drive a channel on a console, and wanted to perfect the sound beyond just a spectrum, a spectrum analyzer of frequencies to see that He wanted to hear the sound, which is so. And also the thing is that when I first started, so Trident closed at the end of 1981. I moved to New York for a while. Trident reopened towards the end of 83, but the lineage had been broken. The T-Boy system had been broken. So I was asked to come back as chief engineer and put a new team together, also head up the new room, which was the SSL room in South London, but also put a new team of people together because I knew the old one and I'd come through the old system. And the team that I helped put together, I can't claim all credit for it, but it was with Flood, Alan Moulder, Spike Stent, Al Clay, who has a house full of Oscars for all the work that he's done with Hans Zimmer now. Hans Zimmer was our go-to keyboard player.
Wow.
Imagine that.
Synth programmer, because only 3 guys could synchronize. This is before sync machines.
Right.
And you couldn't sync a drum machine with an arpeggiator. You could jam sync it, and you could get about 30, 40 seconds that it would kind of be in time. So if we put a Lindrum or an 808 and recorded that onto tape, we'd then have to like jam sync the arpeggiator, and we have to wait for it to sync up. Then we'd jump into record, grab 30 seconds, then 5 people would have a discussion of how far back it started to drift. Then we'd back up,
And then
play
we
it
got to
along.
mark the cut-in point.
and then punch in again to record, hopefully getting it clean on the front of the note on the 16th arpeggiator thing.
Oh my God.
And there was only 3 guys, which was Thomas Dolby, Billy Curry, who was in Ultravox, and Hans Zimmer. They were the only 3 guys who knew how to kind of like jam sync and do that stuff.
Wow.
And then Timecode came out, and you could sync multi-tracks together, and you could sync drum machines with arpeggiators and stuff.
The infamous Simpty beeps.
But what about a team though? I mean, all of those people, that's crazy. And I know you've told me one time, and I hope I'm remembering this correctly, but can you tell our listeners here how Flood got his nickname?
Yeah. Flood had been at a different studio, Marcus Studios, which oddly enough was owned by Marcus Osterdahl, a Swedish guy in London. Lovely guy. And Flood had been a T-boy there and was constantly bringing teas, more than people could even drink, bringing tray after tray of teas and coffees. And seriously, I think, as my recollection goes, there had been another T-boy at the same time called Drought, who didn't get to do 7 U2 albums.
Right.
Or PJ Harvey or Nick Cave or The Killers with Alan Moulder or whoever. Flood, just phenomenally talented person.
I just love that. That's such a good boy. So you know, if you get the chance to be a tea boy, make sure people have tea, right?
Yeah, and I was really good at like clearing up the room after I'd brought food to the room, because I couldn't afford to buy food, so I'd eat the leftovers and hopefully I'd get some of it while it was still warm. So I was like a great tea boy, because I was like, the minute food was done, I'd like clear it out the room and all the plates and everything was gone, and I'd be in the elevator like trying to eat pizza around the bite marks that had been left.
Right. Brutal. Fantastic. Yeah. So
I want to ask a question about Richard Marx. What era did you work with him in?
At his peak, when he had like back-to-back number ones. And I worked on a song with him, Endless Summer Nights, and he'd done the song Satisfied and Right Here Waiting for You. They were all like mega US worldwide number ones.
Was that around the time that CJ was working with him as well?
I guess so, but what I was asked to do was to remix Endless Summer Nights for the UK and Europe.
Okay.
And I loved the song, loved his voice, phenomenal songwriter, amazing songwriter, a real artist, understanding the development of a song and picking up into the pre-chorus, into the chorus, and then, the most beautiful bridges that go into a change and step away from the main part of the song and then come back maybe with a lift as that one into a solo, or a lift going back into a pre-chorus and then choruses out. But he really, an amazing songwriter.
Yeah.
And Endless Summer Nights had just come out, and it was at that moment, it was number one or was top 3 in the States. I think it was number 1. And I was asked to do a remix for Europe. And I said, I need to add additional stuff. I was 20 nothing, you know. And my manager at the time said, she'd called me, you know, said, oh, you got to do a remix on a Richard Marx track. And I said, yeah, I haven't sent it over. I listened to it and called back and said, yeah, I want to, you know, record a lot more stuff. And the phone kind of went quiet, and it was like, Adam, you are aware that this is a number 1 at the moment in America. And being slightly more brash, my twin is like, yeah, I know, but I think it needs stuff.
I have some demands.
Yeah. So anyway, I reworked the song, added a lot of stuff, and the comment came back from Richard that he actually preferred the version, which was very nice to hear.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah. I just expanded on it more. I thought that the song was really, really cool and lovely, but I just felt it was kind of like a little bit flat in its dynamics, and just added a bit more contrast to the arrangement.
Well, it's nice that you listened and allowed that to happen.
Yeah.
So, Adam, you mentioned there one thing I wanted to ask a question, or at least just comment on when you were talking about Richard Marx and his development of the song and things. It strikes me that whole thing sort of transposing up either semitone or a whole tone or even a minor third or something at the end of the last chorus, I don't hear that a lot anymore.
Yeah, I know. I mean, a lot of those amazing skills. I mean, when you listen to like early pop, 60s, whether it's Beatles or Motown or whatever, nearly always the chorus would speed up. The chorus would be 2 or 3 BPM, you know, faster. With Ringo, that was probably unintentional, but then he'd go into a fill and try and figure out where he should be during the fill, because you can hear that as well, which is what's so unique and beautiful about his playing. But that was like the skills where the technology hadn't taken over, you know.
Yeah,
and that's something that, again, you know, we mentioned, like, I share this knowledge because I think it's just so important, and it seems that modern music makers would love to know these things if they knew what it was they're meant to know.
Sure.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
So I feel that very much in like the whole bigger scope of the production of music,
right,
sharing these things. I mean, pop music is in a very different stage at the moment anyway. You know, songs are a little bit more formatted, but those beautiful skills of key changes on the outro, you know, stepping a song up. Sometimes it was a bit corny, but you can still do it in a classy way. And these changes sometimes speed the chorus up a touch. Do it in the computer. You can still do it. You can map.
Yeah.
You know, you can have like a 1 bar slight change. You know.
Right.
Where you just where you just slightly increment the tempo going up to drop into the chorus, so it's not a jump. You know, if people are dancing, then they're not going to fall over.
Right. but it is an interesting thing. I mean, because all of those, I mean, even if we think about pop structure formatting, right? And we think, oh, it's cliche. Yeah, but it's cliche for a reason. It's because it works, right? And, you know, most people that listen to music aren't going to analyze it in such a way anyway. They just know that they like the way it sounds and how it makes them feel. Right. Again, I feel like such an old fart here sometimes when I analyze things and I comment on these things. But there's a few things that come to mind that I just feel like I need to get off my chest here. So the first thing, I'll take a step back when it comes to the gear. And you mentioned that how you can use different console emulations to provide a certain sound on the tracks that you're recording. And a big part of that is, of course, like you said, you have to know what that is imparting. But then I think there's also a conflation of sorts here where we have all of these tools available. And we assume that just because we have a Trident channel strip in our session, that it's going to make it better. Well, no, you have to know what it does, right? And, oh, you know what? This song would only be better if I had an SSL 9000J emulation, right? But
followed by an
everything.
API 2500 compressor or something of that nature.
Obviously, right. But it all comes down to the song again, right? And the emotion. And also, like, even if you don't have 5 different console emulations, use the gear that you have to its fullest. And then when you start hearing those things where things might be lacking, that's when you go out and you try to get something else. But so I think that it's sort of like a fine line there between clever and stupid, isn't it? No, but between, knowing how to fully utilize the gear and also knowing what to listen for and think that it's just, I have to have all of this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It is one of those things, but when somebody, like in your position, when you know what they impart, you can get the fullest benefit of kind of all the flexibility that comes with it.
And there's something I would like to, in the late 80s and around that Richard Marx kind of era, so many records were being done on SSL consoles. Every channel had a compressor, every channel had a gate. It was a really tight, punchy sound.
Right.
And the technology often determines styles of music as well.
Sure.
Just like synchronization enabled New Order and Depeche Mode. Drum machine and arpeggiators. Suddenly people could create new genres of music. One of the big factors of why 80s hip hop is just so great and in your face and crunchy was because the samplers being used were 12-bit samplers. So you were getting a very gritty version of the sound that you'd sampled back, and that became part of the character of the music. And technology can have a role sometimes where it leads the way. Just the fact that with the AMS sampler, you could sample 1.2 seconds and now you could replace a kick drum. Boom, mind-blowing.
Right.
But still, if the kick drum is all over the place and the song is shit and the playing's shit, it doesn't matter how great your sample is that you replace the kick drum with.
Right.
You can't polish the turd is what you're saying.
Yeah, well, that's one of my favorite sayings, and actually you can, and you get a shiny turd.
Sure. But it's still shit.
This is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
You can throw loads of money, and keep lacquering it, but it's always going to be a turd,
Right.
Actually, Mythbusters did do that, didn't they?
Oh, no.
Yes,
really?
they did.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
But, I mean, the point being is like back to basics. I love Wes Anderson films. They always blow my mind visually and the visuals just emotionally. And when he's starting a film, he always determines what the color palette is going to be for the film. He chooses the colors that will make the look of the film feel how he wants it to connect. Mm-hmm. That's the same with sound. I put so much work on any record into visualizing the end result, sometimes storyboarding a video for the song. Did that completely with my first big hit, which was the Blow Monkeys, a song called Digging Your Scene in 85, 86. That's what brought me first time to LA. With Roxette, I think my biggest contribution, to be honest, I did produce some of the songs on the album, but when I was brought into that, they'd already started the record. This was the first album, Look Sharp. They'd started it, they had a collection of songs, but Per had been in the glam rock band Yellentida, I think they were the name, and Marie was the most beautiful, phenomenal Swedish Joni Mitchell kind of singer-songwriter, really beautiful lyrics. It was two individuals coming together, but there wasn't a clear vision. There was like his songs and her songs. And I think my biggest contribution was just in visualizing how does Roxette look. And our first pre-production meeting in Stockholm, first of all, we'd met in London, then I went to Stockholm. The first pre-production meeting, which was a 4-hour meeting, which was meant to be about starting the record and putting stuff together, I said to them, imagine you're in New York, the single's out, it's on MTV, you're staying at the Mayflower on the Upper West Side, which used to be like one of the music, if you didn't want to get stabbed at the Chelsea, you'd go up to the Mayflower. And I said, you walk in your room, you put TV on MTV, this song is on MTV, tell me what you're seeing. And we spent 4 hours talking about the body language, what they were wearing, the yin and the yang, the push and pull between the two of them, which became so much a part of the package with Roxette, was people trying to figure out what's going on with these two,
Right, yeah.
And once we had set the parameters for visualizing what the band was about, then we could choose the sounds of the instruments and choose the instruments and create the parts that would fit with the vision. And I really think my biggest contribution was in establishing the vision of how Roxette would look and act together.
Well, it
That's
definitely
very
worked.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's
And
fantastic.
and then when She's Got the Look was #1 in 17 countries in the same week, we were back in London and we went to a Tex-Mex bar, and we serve a waitress who had the bandoleros with the shotguns and the bottles of tequila in the holsters. We tried to do a shot for every territory that we had a #1.
Oh, Jesus.
Which, yeah, apparently we didn't. We Per and I don't know how far we got, but apparently Marie was last person standing. Bless her.
Wow.
Yay. Swedish alcohol consumption.
That's
Yeah.
it.
go.
Yeah. But yeah, so the fundamentals, back to you, of the fundamentals of writing a song and getting to grips with the essence of it, all the technology, all the bells and whistles, you can do anything. I can sit here and I could have the equivalent of 6 of the most classic consoles in my mix, with the most amazing microphones or mic simulators, which I have through the Slate VMS system.
Yeah.
Incredible. And I've got good warm audio mics as well. But all of it comes down to having a good idea. And something I really learned, like in the late 80s into the 90s, sound got so precise and so cleaned up that nearly all the character got taken out, because everything was suddenly so precise. FM radio had blown up. Now people were broadcasting music in stereo.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of radio stations would add their extra compression to make it punch even more. Sometimes they'd add top end to show how shiny their sound was, because that hadn't been done before
Sure.
on radio. Sometimes they'd add a bit of reverb to get it even shinier.
How did
And
that affect things like the Cure stuff that you worked on?
It was wild because The Cure and the Blow Monkeys were the last 2 records that I did on the Trident A range at Trident before it was sold to Cherokee Studios in LA. I did them almost back to back, 2 of the biggest records, or 2 of the most important records that I had. The Cure was the song Close to Me. And specifically on that song, Dave Allen, genius, had produced all of their records. On that one, he asked me to engineer with him because he wanted a specific sound. The band were 8 hours late because they were so drunk it took 8 hours to get all of them into one car
No.
and actually get them to the studio. I nearly walked out several times during the 8-hour wait. And, at some stage during that wait, I said to Dave, look, are you sure you need me here? And he said, yeah, mate, I got to get this really specific sound that's happening. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, the video is going to be in a wardrobe, and it's all claustrophobic, and the wardrobe's going to go over a cliff, and there's water going to be coming in, and it's got to sound like they're in this wardrobe, like that. So what I did was I got 4 big gobos, the ones that don't have any plexiglass see-through in it, just solid material fabric, and I made a box that was the size of a wardrobe. And when Robert Smith arrived, I put him in the box. I think I used the 87 or something for a very tight, warm sound, and it was dead. All around him, the sound was dead. So because I had a visual reference of what the video would be for that song, I could then craft the sound to suit the character of the song and the purpose of the song. And I think nearly always songs where I've been involved that were big hits is because we had the opportunity and the common thread between everyone to really visualize the end result and then set about making the choices that would arrive at that goal.
That's awesome.
The vision that we had.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I mean, because that's, you're taking that to a whole different scale now, but, we often talk about visualizing a mix when you get tracks from somebody at the first listen to kind of think about, okay, well, where do you hear this going if you don't get super clear directives from an artist or something? Right? But that, thinking from a visual perspective is even more impactful, I think. So that's pretty cool.
I have a question. Do you know an artist by the name of Mark Luna?
No. Not
Okay,
familiar,
then
but
it's probably not somebody that you've worked with, but somebody that maybe you worked with the whole visualization thing, worked with him, and it rubbed off on him, because that's where I learned a lot of that visualization stuff in terms of like, where are we taking this? Before we even wrote a note together, he was already like, where do we envision this going? And it was very interesting to do that, because now I tend to do that too.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing just, and why not put that work into it?
Yeah.
You know, if you want to create something that's convincing. And I only learned by making my own music, and I'd finish it. It's like I was nearly signed with my brother. We were kind of like a UK Hall & Oates, Blue Eyed Soul kind of thing before Hall & Oates got into their pop thing, which was also with Neil Kernon from Trident. The whole kind of like having a sense of what is the end goal and then how do I get there was because I was making my own music, and I'd record a song, and it was a song. It had instruments, it had notes, there were parts being played, there was an intro, there was verses, there was a chorus, whatever. And then, you know, the song would finish after 3 minutes 40 or whatever. And I think, but that isn't what I intended. It doesn't sound how I intended. Yeah, it constitutes a song, but it's not what I had in mind. So that really set me off on this deeper journey into understanding how sound feels.
Sure.
And one of my major moments in that was like after the big rock era of the late 70s, then going into the disco era of pristine music and the most phenomenal musicianship, then the pushback against disco and also Margaret Thatcher was punk, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And suddenly I was working with Cockney Rejects, Angelica Upstarts, various versions of Bow Wow Wow and the Pistols, Sex Pistols, then in different combinations, and then almost 35 years later working with the Pistols again, which was wild. I remember with one of the punk bands, and they came in, and I can't even remember half the records that we did because they'd come in with, and they'd have their band name, but then by the time the record was finished, their band name would have changed, and now they're on Top of the Pops on TV. And I'd be looking, and I'd be looking at that. I'd be looking at the band on Top of the Pops, thinking, that sounds familiar, and that bloke, he looks familiar too. But they were called something else, you know,
right.
6 weeks earlier. But I was at one of the punk bands, and the drummer came in, and the head on the floor tom was split, completely split and flapping. And Bob Henry, who'd been the drummer with the Kinks, had a drum store round the corner from Trident. And it was like 20 seconds to get there. And I said to the drummer, oh, mate, look, I'm just going to pop out and get another, you know, head for your floor tom, you know, and then we can start recording. And he said, I've been playing with that fucking tom for 6 fucking months. It sounds fucking brilliant. Just put a fucking mic on it and fuck off. You know?
And that's like, an artist that knows what he wants.
And it's like, yeah, I can do that as well.
Right. Proper punk rock.
Yeah, I think I'll take option B.
Yeah.
And it sounded really bizarre. But I realized, and I learned pretty early on, that what constitutes a good sound isn't a pristine sound. It's the sound that feels right for the genre. And that tom actually was perfect for that band, you know.
Right.
So that really shaped my awareness as well. And then further along my journey, I'd worked with Nico in the mid-'80s from Velvet Underground in London. And then years later, after moving to LA, which I said I've been here 25 years permanently, I've worked on 5 different projects with John Cale from Velvet Underground, which has just been phenomenal. Just a amazing person. Just so frighteningly intelligent. And one project I did was a film score that he'd recorded, and they wanted me to mix it in surround. This is going back a few years. I just set up a surround system in, at first I had a studio in LA called The Boat, which had George Martin's original 1969 Neve 8028 that Rupert Neve had designed for George Martin. It was in Studio 3 at Air, which is where the Pistols had recorded their albums.
I got to see that studio with you actually. At one point. That was fantastic, and I remember the gear that was in there and how it just made my pants fit funny. You know?
Did you touch the piano?
Yeah,
I did not, but I did touch the Neve. So yeah,
just as good.
Right.
Yeah, we had 23 outboard compressors, 3 LA2As. Each one sounded different. I knew the top one was a bit brighter, the middle one was a bit boxy, the third LA2A was all bottom end and warmth and had no top end. So again, even learning your outboard gear is like
Yeah.
learning your plugins and choosing which one works, which is how I learned from Mike Stone, who had done the first 5 Queen albums, when he was saying to me, on the acoustics, can you put an LA2A? On the bass, I want an 1176. And on those really heavy saturated guitars, can you put an LA3A on them? You know, put the input gain to kind of like 11 o'clock, put it on ratio, 4:1. I didn't know. I didn't know
Right.
anything. And I'd be moving these things, but I'd start to think, okay, he wanted LA2A on acoustics. Why? Let me try and discover how that sounds. So I put an LA2A on the bass and see what it did compared to what it did to an acoustic, and started to train my ear into how just the circuitry of these boxes, I'm not talking about hitting any compression or anything, but just the circuitry or the tubes in these vintage boxes of outboard, how they change the sound. And that exact same exercise is what people need to do with their plugins, especially the plugins that are emulated on real gear. And sometimes I'll come across a plugin and I think, oh my god, that sounds so digital, it's horrible, I'm never going to use that. And then next thing, I'll get a track in with a synth that wanted to be like 80s and sound digital, and I think, oh my god, that plugin that I swore I would never use will be perfect. Because just the plugin alone is going to filter these frequencies and make it sound more shiny just in itself before I even start to play with any buttons. So that's been such an important part of the journey of understanding sound and trying to figure it out. At Trident, everyone just made it up as they were going along. And that's what I'm still doing,
That's fantastic. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're doing now when you're lecturing at like Herb Alpert School, and that's at UCLA, yeah?
Yeah. It's fantastic, and I'm not necessarily saying this is how you do things.
Of course.
I'm doing a course on the art of music production, which is understanding song structure, understanding how to motivate performance, how to deal with personalities, how to put an arrangement together, how to use different time changes, maybe how to put a 6/8 bar in a pop song for a 2-bar turnaround and then come back to 4/4, and for the chorus, or just at the end of like the pre-chorus or at the end of the bridge before it drops to the chorus or whatever, just having a suspended extra 2 beats so that you've got an extra half bar, or put an extra bar and maybe add the 7th and just step up a little bit and then the drop.
Right. You just made my day right there, because I have been doing that, and I've been trying to get other people that I co-write with to do stuff like this. And a lot of the times I literally have to drag them kicking and screaming into doing it. And then once they get used to it, they're like, that is just like, it's a way to set yourself apart from everything that's currently going on that's just strictly 4/4.
Yeah, and not every song needs every single trick. And that's the thing. But when you've got those, to use my cliche again, but when you've got those colors in your palette, you can choose the shades in between and apply what works, and trial and error. You're saying like often, you've got to drag people kicking and screaming. I realize that in producing, one of the biggest things is like creating this real trust and bond, which you can only do by example.
Yep.
I've got lots of cliches as my students will remind me, but I learned often like working one-to-one with an artist and knowing where the song should go, knowing what the next stage would be, knowing what the next idea would be. But if I didn't take the artist on the journey and show them why I thought that was the next idea, they wouldn't understand. Then they'd start to become disconnected from their song. Then a rift starts to happen in the working relationship. Then there's less trust. You'll start to get some pushback just because sometimes you just needed to get on with it and get it done within the time frame and budget. But I learned that sometimes with an artist, you've got to take them by the hand and walk them all the way around the block just to go next door.
Yes.
Yeah.
And when I say kicking and screaming, I mean, I have to give multiple examples of like how this actually ends up working and benefits the song.
Exactly. And when I'm working with an artist and I've got a strong vision, I don't care whose idea it is that gets there. I see my role as being the catalyst, as being the mirror image, as being a soundboard to bounce their ideas back at them, hopefully to get to the next version of the idea. And then normally you know when it's working better than it did before, and then you try the next thing and maybe that's too much, so you dial it back one step, and that trial and error. But that's the real beauty of the art of music production, is understanding people, motivating people, sometimes having to come down and push if you have to. But really the craft of it is something. And again, in that mid-'80s period is when I started to understand how to do it, because I was engineering and I thought, oh my God, I'm the engineer. There's people standing around. I better get doing something with these buttons, and didn't have a clue what I was doing, but I was now an engineer. And then once I'd got on top of all of that and felt that my mixing was okay as well, which was maybe 6-7 years in, around 1985, that's when I actually fell in love with sound. And started to want to discover, how can I actually create feelings just through the sound of the notes, not just the notes that are played, but the sound of them. And often it's things that we do anyway. Jody, you got a load of guitars. You're going to automatically have an idea for a song in a certain vibe, certain mood, and you're going to go to the guitar. And Chris, I know you're a phenomenal guitarist as well. And it's just an automatic thing. And what you're doing is thinking, okay, is this a semi-hollow? Is this a thin body? Is this a Strat or a Tele or, whatever? Is this a big jumbo acoustic, or is it a Martin? And then again, am I using light gauge or heavy gauge? And am I using a pick, or what kind of pick? Is it a heavy? All these different things
affect the way the notes come out.
Yeah. And they're all parts of the element of capturing the sound of the emotion of those notes. The notes being a part of the song that supports the story that you're maybe trying to tell. And that journey is what's kept me fascinated, and that journey of sound and discovery of sound. And just as a quick thing, what it's led me to, I started getting into being asked to mix film stuff and TV stuff. My mixing is very cinematic and it's very dimensional from all this visualizing. So then I was being asked to mix some film stuff, and the first feature movie I did was a Robert De Niro film with Susan Sarandon, Diane Keaton, Robin Williams, Amanda, nothing like starting off the deep end.
So you're starting off at the bottom rung there, working yourself up, right?
Yeah. Mixing like 33 cues of music with orchestration.
Wow.
More and more, then I mixed the theme for the TV show The Americans, some stuff for True Blood, various other like TV theme stuff. And then people started reaching out to me saying, supervisors were saying, hey, we know you're also working with lots of cool bands, or we're looking for a song like this, or we want some music like that. Is there anyone in your circle that knows? At the same time, for at least the last 20 years, every artist I've worked with has said to me, how can I get my music to music supervisors? That's where there's some money. How can I get to music supervisors and so on? And I realized that there was no one from the music side of, from our world, who was actually representing artists and musicians and songwriters and placing their existing songs in TV shows and films and so on. So realizing that no one was really standing in the middle of this, supervisors coming to you from one side, artists coming to you for the other, but the two sides not meeting. That's where I created my company, Accidental Entertainment, and Accidental Studios in my house here in Silver Lake. And we represent about 120 artists.
That's great.
It's good stuff.
And which is amazing. We're placing music every week. We're about to go into a major expansion, about to double up the company as well, and doing publishing and also advising and creating NFTs for artists as another means of revenue, and just really stepping into this whole new world of revenues, which I remember the day when a band would be approached for their music for a commercial. They'd say, yeah, £500,000, tell them to F off. We're not selling out,
Right.
Gone are those days.
I think that changed with the Stones, right? When I think it was Windows 95, right? And they said, well, just tell Bill Gates we want $1 million and he'll turn it down. And he goes, yeah, okay. and that was it, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So
$1 million.
Yeah, $1 million. Right. Yeah. So, I mean, we could probably keep talking to you for another hour or two or three here, but I think we will probably try to let you go here.
We still need to ask three questions. Yes,
exactly. So we have three questions that we like to ask people. No, there's nothing. First off, is what's the best tea in LA? No, that's not one of the questions. The first question that we like to ask everybody: what's your favorite piece of gear that you can't live without?
My barefoot speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got the MM45s, life changing.
So are they more for tracking or mixing or mastering?
All of it.
All of it.
Wow.
Yeah. The most complete all round speakers. I'm endorsed by Barefoot, but because I love them.
Because you like them, not the other way around.
Yeah. I mean, otherwise I couldn't use speakers that they changed everything. Yeah.
Amazing.
Well, that's fantastic. Jody, you want to do the next one?
Well, I feel like we've already gotten this, but the biggest lesson that you have learned in your career?
To listen.
Okay.
To listen to what people are saying. At the beginning, through my own inexperience and nervousness, I'd, jump into meetings or jump into situations, really feeling that I've got to be saying stuff and really got to be showing. And then once I'd started to achieve some things, I started to mellow out a bit and think, you know what, let me hear what other people are saying. And then I can work out what information I'm getting and work out how we direct this. And also to take breaks. That's one of the biggest things is to constantly take breaks, step away, like every 40 minutes, take a break, clear my ears.
Almost unlike this podcast because it's going so long.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so the last one, advice that you universally give to people. I mean, I'm sure you have people coming up and asking for advice all the time. So what's the big one?
Biggest thing is to
collect plugins, even if you don't know how to use them, right? Yeah,
or just collect consoles.
Right, if you got that budget,
Yeah, I think to make music because you enjoy it is one of the most important things. It's music. It's meant to be enjoyed. If you're not able to sustain yourself with music, still make music, find something else that you can sustain you so that you can enjoy your music and not be miserable by having to provide for yourself and whoever. Biggest advice, always learn, always feed yourself, feed your brain, and research, find out how things are done. With every new piece of technology that comes out, I think that's it, game over, I'm done, I'm washed up. My career, I'm never going to understand this bit.
Right. Is that how you felt about the split EQ from Eventide?
yeah, exactly. Every time after a sulk, I'll come back and think, okay, I've figured out other stuff. This can't be that tricky, and to always embrace the challenges, and to reinvent, and to keep my eye on the prize.
There it is. Excellent advice right there.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, Adam. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yes,
and,
I agree.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have you back at some point if you'd like. But again, it's been great to reconnect, and thank you so much for doing this, Adam. I really, really appreciate it.
Pleasure. It's so great to reconnect and chat with you both, and had a great time. This is
Thank you as well, Adam.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right, we want to thank Adam Moseley once again for joining us on Inside the Recording Studio. And right now it's time for Friday Finds. Chris, what have you got for us today?
It was a major breakthrough this week, I think, in technology world, because iLok has finally gone Apple Silicon native. So my projection is that now a lot of it, right? I am not running an Apple Silicon machine, but those who are will undoubtedly do a dance of joy, because this means that a lot of the plugins are, if they're not already, they will soon be available to run natively on the M1 chips and all that family. So I think that has to be first my Friday find. What about you? What do you got?
I've got another, well, essentially what it is, and I just kind of brushed it there when he mentioned about learning technology and suddenly feeling depressed about it, so to speak.
Yeah.
The split EQ from Eventide is currently going through a sale at the moment. So if you're listening to this as the episode is released, be aware that Eventide still has the split EQ going on a flash sale at the moment. And I'm going to go with the split EQ because that EQ is still rocking very amazing EQ.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes. While we've got your attention, we ask that you go to InsideTheRecordingStudio.com and sign up for our mailing list. Doing so will get you weekly reminders about the Tuesday tips when they come out, and we'll make sure you don't miss any future episodes of the podcast. Send us an email at goldstar, GOLDSTAR, at InsideTheRecordingStudio.com with the phrase Moseley, and you'll get something cool back in your inbox. If you have a topic of suggestion for Chris and I to explain in a future episode, contact us at the contact page, and we'll put it into consideration for a future episode. And with that, I'll say, see you next week.
Have a good one, everybody.